Driving a car can bring up a lot of different emotions. You're driving, especially around the streets of Kokomo, you're driving and thinking, well, these cars were all over the place 90 years ago. My name's Jeff Griffon. I drive a 1922 Haynes Tourister. The first car, Elwood Haynes started working on it because he had a problem getting from his job to Kokomo to work, so he started tinkering and he started developing the car in 1893, and it took his first run in 1894 here in Kokomo on July 4th, 1894. My car originally was built here in Kokomo. It was purchased by people out in Pennsylvania, and that's where it spent most of its life. A gentleman here in the early 80s purchased the car and brought it back to Kokomo. He was well into his 80s here about 7 years ago, and his children decided they didn't want the car, and he asked me if I wanted to take care of it, and I told him yes. Owning an older automobile, sometimes it's a love-hate relationship because you just don't hop in and start driving like you do your current modern cars. So they're fun to drive when they work right, but you got to remember some of these cars are almost 100 years old, and the process took about 2 years to be complete. The model that I have is a limited production model. Totally that year, 1922, Haynes made approximately 5,000 cars, and out of that only 10% were the large Model 75 cars. And within that group there were different body styles of the Model 75. There are less than 100 Haynes automobiles known to exist total. The Tourister model, there are only currently 3 known to exist. If you look at different features of the Haynes, you'll notice things like a steering wheel that moves out of the way so the driver can get in and out easier. Your car's almost 100 years old and it has a tilt-type steering wheel. There are different parts of the car that when you're driving that what we take for granted today, engine adjustments are all done by a computer. When you're driving a car like that, you're having to adjust the engine performance as you're driving along. You're adjusting the spark of the car, how the distributor is allowing the ignition to happen. If you try to drive the car, steering it and making a fast turn, you're not going to do that because there's no power steering. We like to tell people that it has Armstrong steering because it takes big, hefty arms to turn that big car without power steering. Growing up in the Detroit area, my father worked for the auto industry and he loved old cars, and he would always tell me about his first car was a 1925 Model T. And whenever we could, we went to car shows growing up, and he liked to talk about it. He enjoyed them probably a lot more than I did, but that kind of rubbed off on me. And it's nice to be able to go to the Elwood Haynes Museum, walk around the house that the inventor of this car walked around in, actually look through some of his papers and do a little research on the cars and the man himself and what he did for Kokomo. It's a rather luxury car compared to what most people drove in the 20s. That car new cost about $2,400. A Model T at the time cost like $400. It was not every man's car. It was more for people with some means to drive it. When you walk around that car, you see the quality of the craftsmanship and the design, and how solid the cars were. The car industry in Indiana was probably one of the, it was larger than what people think Michigan is today. A lot of cars started in Indiana. And it's interesting that you're in a small town in Indiana, central Indiana, and it's kind of the birthplace of a lot of the motoring that we do today. Without Elwood Haynes, you kind of wonder, what would Kokomo really be? Would the other auto companies have come to Kokomo, like Delco Electronics or Chrysler? Would they have come to Kokomo if it hadn't been for that start with Elwood Haynes?